Chapter 23 is the last days and giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Let me tell you a little story. I took a paper as part of my undergraduate degree that was completely devoted to the German 18th century author Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The Goethe paper, it was called. Quite helpfully, does what it says on the tin. And the person who supervised this was a guy called Nicholas Boyle, who was like the Goethe expert, who'd written this huge 3-volume biography of Goethe, the poet and the age. Anyway, the reason that I'm telling you this story is little did I know at the time, but that Nicholas Boyle, in whose little room I sat with the fire crackling in the corner, frantically trying to scribble down all the wisdom that he had about Goethe, had also written some Christian books. And it was in one of his books, I forget the title now, that I only read out after I'd finished being supervised by him. I had no idea who was doing this. Well, I'd say he was taking the Goethe paper, but he wrote, I think, just really insightfully on this passage of giving to Caesar what is Caesar and giving to God what is God's. And it's in his book that I first came across the idea that I've come across a number of times since, that if we try to understand giving to Caesar what is Caesar and giving to God what is God's as equal and opposite things, then we're hopelessly falling short of the brilliance of what Jesus is doing in this passage. And that when Jesus says, give me a denarius whose image is this, it's Caesar's image, so you give to Caesar what's got Caesar's image on it, that the whole implied subtext of that for anyone who's got ears to hear and has read Genesis 1 is there's something else with an image on in that encounter, and it is all the people there who are made in the image of God, and therefore they should give their whole selves with God's image on it to God. And therefore the giving to Caesar is itself framed and exceeded and contextualized by a much greater giving to God, because it's a small part of ourselves, our money. And so, this has all sorts of shoots, tentacles all over in terms of what that means for the way that Christians relate to society and how our duty to God dovetails with our duty as being good citizens and so forth. And I try and pull some of those things out in this chapter. And I think, let's just have a look there at the chapter outline. There's one thing I was going to talk about. One of the things that I really enjoyed reading about and decided to put in the chapter is the way in which in the last days, this is not coming out of that same passage, but it's a related idea, is that Christians approach the world with what Paul Ricoeur and others have called a hermeneutics of charity, so that we are predisposed to love the world, but in the biblical understanding of love. You see, Jesus loves the Pharisees when he calls them a brood of vipers, doesn't he? So love, I think, so what am I trying to say? I think we have a very impoverished idea of love that is greatly expanded by the Bible. And I think this biblical disposition of love is a very solid and productive hermeneutic principle, just meaning the way that we interpret the world should be guided by this love. And partly that means trying to understand people and movements and arguments in the best possible light, in the way that they would wish to be understood, not willfully misunderstanding or twisting. That's part of the hermeneutics of charity. It's also seeking in a Jeremiah 29 type of way to work for the good and the flourishing of the city in which we find ourselves. And it's also, what Jesus is doing when he does call the Pharisees a brood of vipers. That's love. That can be a hermeneutic of charity as well. And so trying to use this lens of the hermeneutic of charity as a way to approach and engage with contemporary culture, but not letting that culture define charity or love for it, but trying to draw the definition of love, which is a much more complex, sinuous, interesting, fresh definition of love, trying to draw that definition of love out of the Bible itself.